So, exactly how long have the kings of the East been here in the Americas? When did they arrive? How did they get here? Why are they here? What are they doing here? What were they doing here? What is the general purpose? And so, what we have here is a history that includes a mass migration dynamic into the Americas from the East. Now, what's interesting is there are all of these narratives floating around about America being the old world and the other place being the real new world. There is no new world or old world, it's all the same thing. The land has been here, the water has been here. This is not a new world. And so, what we are looking at here today is who are these kings of the East? And again, why are they here? And when did they come here? The kings of the East are related to a confederation, and you can see these confederations all throughout Scripture. And so there is this brotherhood, this buddy system that is going on with a number of collectives. And so you see these names associated with each other throughout the Scripture. So you see the Hagarenes, you see Ishmael, you see Edom, you see Moab, you see Gabal. What's interesting about that is that's Kabul again, Cabal, Ammon, Amalek, the Philistines, Tyre, and Asher. And so you see these names as a collective, but what's interesting is they are often referred to as a confederation, a confederacy. And if you'll note in the Americas, this word has been popping up all over the place with respect to indigenous people, with respect to an entire collection of states at one point in time. But it's that whole construct of confederacy. And clearly, the indigenous people of America did not use the term confederacy. And another thing about referring to America as the old world. One of the reasons for referring to America as the old world is to give license to everyone else around the world to America. And so if America is the old world, sort of like Africa being the motherland, when you put forth something like that, then it gives the insinuation that the land belongs to everyone, because then it becomes sort of this motherland dynamic again. Again, it's a part of a game, even though some people who are asserting it don't recognize that it is a part of a game. It is a part of a game of claiming ownership and taking ownership away from the indigenous people, the original people, the First Nations, the first people. And so the East really is over there in the East. And if you're looking at it like a flat surface, like I know some of you do, then you have east, west, north, and south. What is clear is what is over there that is considered the east is not the same as what is over here that is considered the west. These are two different directions, two geographic spaces. And of course, then you have north and south. But these are the groups of people that are associated with this idea of the kings of the east. And what's interesting is you will see these purported manifestations of them throughout the Americas. And what has happened is that individuals have used these mass migrations to sort of prove that the entities that migrated from the East were actually always here. That cannot be accurate. You can't actually be in two places at one time. You originated somewhere. And so what's going on, however, is this postulation that people are making that this is the place where they all originated. This is the old world. This is where Edom is. This is where Moab is. This is where Amalek is. This is where everything is. And so then it suggests that what is over there is not real and that no one originated over there. But I offer to you that there is a place over there, and some people appear to have sprung up from over there. And I also suggest to you to consider very deeply whether or not you actually believe that everything was in the Americas and that everyone was in the Americas. I'm not saying that that's not the case completely, but I am suggesting that you rethink this. Now we have another component to this confederation and this mass migration, because this wasn't just a mass migration. These migrations were couched in religious terms. And so all of these people were moving around because they believed they needed to spread the wisdom. Okay, so whether we were talking about coming out of Rome or whether we are talking about coming out of Babylon, we have people who it's not enough for them to believe whatever it is they believe. They believe that other people need to believe it too, and then that gives credence to what they believe. So it's not enough for them to believe. It's not enough for them to follow. They need everyone else to join in to legitimize whatever it is that they are doing. This is another one of those boundary dynamics that we talked about. And so you see the words that are there. And it's interesting because there's a play with the J and the Y, but these two words are the same words, and you can put a J in front of them, you can put a Y in front of them, and they will be the same words. What's interesting is one is considered sort of like an action, sort of that crusade-like action, but it's the same word as the other one. Both of them have roots in this idea of contention and striving. So that's something to keep in mind. But all of these, at some point in time, have been understood as belonging to these confederations. And the big name that we have is Almoravid. What's interesting about Almoravid is that this word has some betacism dynamics going on with it, and so it's also Almoravid. What's also interesting is when you do a translation, looking at the Arabic, looking at the Hebrew, this idea of morbid actually comes up, Morbid, and we're going to look at that because that morbidity is tied to a number of the themes that we've heard about throughout history related to the entities known as the Moors. But Moor and Moravid go together. Of course, there are so many different people who've been given this name Moor, all sorts of parts of it. But this is a particular group of people that are associated with the kings of the East. And also, this is a particular group of people that went into Europe and into West Africa. And the question is, when did they make it over here to the Americas? Now, many people talk about some of these collectives as races of people. In other words, lineages, genetic lines. In some instances, that may be the case. In some instances, not. But with respect to this particular collective, this is about a religious dynamic. And so you have a sort of a race and religion coalescing dynamic going on with this situation. So you have the Almoravids. They are or were a member of a Muslim dynasty of North Africa. And according to the narrative, they flourished between 1049 and 1145. And they were focused really on Orthodox Islamic lines and focused on conquering and political dominance. And so they achieved this political dominance in northwestern Africa, that area that's close to what used to be called Carthage, and also Spain. And so the name of the collective was Almoravid. However, because of the betacism dynamic, and this gets deep with this Almoravid dynamic, it's also Almoravid. And just as a little reminder here, the Almoravids or Almorabids are associated with the Chaldee. We've already discussed the Chaldee, so if you need to brush up on that, you can go back and look at that discussion about the Chaldee, but they are all associated, all tied together. The location for the Almoravids, in many instances, you will hear them associated with Marrakesh. You will hear them associated with Morocco. You will hear them associated with Al-Andalus. So you will hear them associated with a number of places, but the allegiance of the Almoravids rests with a particular location. And that location is Babylon. The reason this is important to make note of is there are often instances where different places have been identified as Babylon. Babylon was an actual place. Because the Almoravids and a number of these other collectives traveled all over the world doing this sort of missionary work, we'll call it mission work, okay? They traveled all over doing this mission work. Oftentimes, the artifacts went with them. And so they left all of these cultural artifacts in these various places. And so you see other places sort of having these identities superimposed onto them. What happened in the Americas is very interesting because all of this Babylonian stuff made its way into the Americas. And then you have a collective of people who are essentially Babylonians who are in the Americas. And so one of the dynamics that has taken place is that America has been redefined based upon the migration dynamic. And so, a place is named after the people, or the people are named after the place. And so right now, the Babylonians are here. They are the kings of the East. They are here. They have been here. They have come from all sorts of areas, Europe, Africa. Their allegiance is Babylon, ancient Babylon. However, many of them are here. So they've sort of set up house in the Americas and sort of laid claim to it. So given America, the Americas, this Babylonian identity. But this is not Babylon. And just because the Babylonians made their way to the Americas does not change that. And there is a dynamic afoot right now where more and more entities that have historically, genetically been tied to Babylon, they are making their way into the Americas. So sort of reshaping the demographic of America, reshaping the culture of America, reshaping the genetic lines of America, reshaping the history, the narrative of America. Who are the original people? So even that narrative is being changed as more entities with this allegiance to Babylon make their way into America, mainland America, into the Americas. And in keeping with the association between the Almoravids and Babylon, ancient Babylon, which goes by the name Iraq at this point, you see a number of names or words that are tied to the Almoravids or people who identify in that way historically or see that as a part of their genetic history or their spiritual history. You'll often see an attachment to you are. We've talked about that before. You are UK. And then these variations, which would include Iraq, IRAQ, and then IROQ. Now that IROQ is associated with who? The Iroquois. And so there are a lot of questions about the Iroquois and whether the Iroquois are actually indigenous to the Americas. I would offer to you that there's a high likelihood that they are not. Again, you can't spring up from two places simultaneously. And so there is quite a bit of relationship between the Iroquois and the Almoravids. Okay. And so that's another connection that we are looking at to Babylon is all of these names. And so when you see the names in the Americas, there is this tendency for people to think because the names are here, this must really be the place. No, it's just a part of colonization. It's just a part of people traveling around and superimposing all sorts of identities onto other people. An interesting focus for the Almoravids was this identity of being not only warriors, but warrior scholars. And so that became a really big thing with respect to the Almoravids. And of course, those of you who've looked at the whole Cherokee ancestry dynamic, surely you can see that something is going on with that Cherokee history. That's not to say that none of the individuals who identify as Cherokee are indigenous, but it is just to say that there is a heavy overlay of this Almoravid dynamic inside of the Cherokee narrative and a number of the collectives on the East Coast of America. And so here we see this translation dynamic related to the Almoravids, Almorabid. And what you see is this translation coming out of the Hebrew, which was coming out of the Arabic. And it's coming up as morbid. So that Morabid is coming up as morbid. And so this again is associated with all of those words that are associated with the word more. So you see all of these different dynamics related to morbidity. Essentially, we're going to look at a few of those words. And what has happened is that whole idea of morbidity has also been related to a phenotype dynamic. But what we find is when we really look at the Almoravids and we look at all of these entities that were migrating, they didn't have just one phenotype. And so there are a number of dynamics that are going on wherein there's confusion about who all of these people are because they are hiding behind these phenotypes. And so there are all sorts of racial constructs that go along with these phenotypes that make it very confusing in terms of understanding who is who and what is what and what they were really up to. But it also looks like a dog and pony show where you have certain individuals, everybody's on the same team, but playing different parts. And so that's what you have with these migration dynamics. You have individuals on the same team, but presenting as completely different people in some instances. And as you can see, there is this correlation between this idea of morbid and this symbolic understanding of darkness. And so with morbidity, we have these other constructs like morose or gloomy, melancholy, gruesome, sinister, perverse, and maleficent. And so there are a number of dynamics related to this Almoravid construct that give rise to the confusion related to what does that word more mean. This is a part of a game, however, because there are a number of word dynamics that have come up wherein you'll have words that mean they are antonyms essentially, but it's the same word. And so it's sort of like belle, meaning beautiful or good, but also meaning war. That kind of weird stuff. You also have the same thing with more, with amour. You have this idea of love, and then you have this idea of death. You have all of these weird dynamics going on with these words, and it does not look like it's accidental. I mean, you just can't accidentally come up with this sort of thing that's going on. And so it's serving a purpose, and part of the purpose clearly historically has been utter confusion. And so you don't really know what is meant sometimes when you are looking at certain words, you're looking at certain histories, you're looking at certain constructs. And this morabid is no exception. Now let's consider this whole dynamic of where the people went to. So we've got this conquering going on in Europe. We've got conquest going on in Africa, conquest in Asia, and then ultimately the conquering of the Americas. Now, a question is, when exactly did the people get to the Americas? It's easy to see how somebody could go from Asia to Europe, Asia to Africa, Europe to Africa. That's pretty easy to see. What's difficult to see is how someone fixed it in their mind to go across that ocean. Is it that the ocean wasn't there at the time and that there was a major split that occurred? Um, it's very unclear at this point. But what we do have is this multi-directional conquest dynamic going all around the world again, conquering, taking people's things. And it's always, I don't care if we're talking about Rome, we're talking about the Almoravids, the claim is it's always in the name of God. Well, here's the thing. God doesn't really need all of the gold and silver and all of that stuff that people have been going around collecting. Because if we are looking at that one God created all of that stuff. So that one God wouldn't need anyone to go around digging, collecting, taking, commandeering, wouldn't need anyone to do any of that. But that's always a part of the narrative. But if you'll note, what comes about is an acquisition of riches from all of these other places under the guise of spirituality. Now, of course, it could be spirituality. We're going to look at some spirituality dynamics, but there's a little bit more to it. There's a little bit more of the human dynamic going on with a lot of the going around the world. It's very similar to Cain and Gain. And here you can sort of see this map to give you an idea of how far these places are from each other. And so we are not talking about people in SUVs, getting on the road. We are talking about people going on foot, people going by horse, people going by camel. We are talking about people going in boats. And so we are not talking about places that are right next door. So this takes quite a bit of effort and quite a bit of motivation. So the question is, what's motivating all of this movement, all of this conquest? And so you can see here, even with going from that West Bank area over to Nigeria even, that is quite a bit of distance to travel. And you can also see these different places in relation to each other. Most people, by the way, are not really that interested in this level of migration. So again, this takes quite a bit of motivation. What is the motivating factor? That's the question. And when did all of this motivation take place? And then just look at this distance here. And so if this ocean was always there, we have a problem here because we are talking about people traveling over 10,000 miles to get from over there to over here. And again, a question is, how did you even know that over here existed? And did you really come from over there to over here in the 1400s? Or did you come from over there to over here much earlier in time? And what time was that? Part of the reason why we don't have the complete history is because people keep changing names. We're going to talk about a name change that took place that might contribute to all of this confusion about when people traveled and when people arrived and why they traveled and why they arrived. One thing that stands out is in the naming dynamic. So we have the Mojave Indians, we have the Mojave Desert, and interestingly, this is related to that whole idea of Moravid and Morabid. also associated with that word Moab and or Moab. And when you deal with the betacism dynamic with respect to Moab or Moab, you have Moav or Moab. What's also interesting is when Moab is mentioned in scripture that first time, it really is Moab, not Moab. And also, interestingly, it's feminine and not masculine. Now, this isn't clarified initially in Strong's or in the etymology, but that's exactly what it is. And so the question is, what is that exactly all about? Because the name is shrouded in mystery, okay? And so there's a lot going on there. But the Mojave name is definitely associated with that. And then, of course, you have some other individuals who decided to travel out in that direction and name an entire place Moab. So you've got these dynamics going on. And then people who are pretending like they are not thinking clearly are saying things like, this proves that this is Moab. Utah, that proves that that is Judah. Israel really is over there in the western part of the United States. Now, common sense tells you that when colonizers colonize, they change things. They change names, they change people, they change all sorts of things. And assuming that just because you see Moab out there, that that is Moab, people aren't really assuming that. People are playing games. Okay, nobody really believes that. It's like the whole Memphis dynamic. Why don't you look up how many places there are in the world named Memphis? Just go right ahead. Try it out. See what you come up with. And so if you believe that Memphis sitting down there in Tennessee is Memphis of Egypt, just because it has the name Memphis. And then, of course, Cairo is in Illinois. If you believe that, go right ahead. Now, there are many places with these names. And so you really have to sort of pick and choose, where the colonizers placed Memphis, where the colonizers placed all of these places. And I definitely encourage you to look and see how many places you see with these names. That's all a part of the confusion, is going around and giving different places these names and then sticking the word new onto certain things. You have New England, you have New York, you have New Zealand. It goes on and on with this foolishness. Okay. And here we have the Mojave manifesting some elements of colonization. So you have them looking one way in one depiction, and then you have them looking another way in this particular depiction. And you also have some dynamics with the Mojave that are associated with the Maori people. So there's a question about whether there is a connection between the Mojave and the Maori. And then you even see the person who was, according to the narrative, captured by the Mojave and clearly has some of the facial markings that you see on the women of the Maori. And when you look at some of the ancient pictures of the Maori people, they look a little different than they do today for the most part. And so you can see there that there's a colonization dynamic that also took place there. And when these colonization dynamics take place, you also have this ethnic contamination. They often call it ethnic cleansing. It's very interesting. It's really a contamination. It's not cleansing anything. It's actually defiling whatever is there. It's not purifying it. And so we know that there was significant movement from the east to the west around the 7th century. But what we've been told, however, is that the massive movement into the Americas started occurring heavily in the 1400s. However, it's pretty safe to assume that if the ocean was not there the way the ocean is there now, and the land spaces were closer or even connected, it's safe to assume that the Almoravids and the rest of the similarly situated collectives made their way into the Americas very early on, hundreds of years before this 1400 mark. And it's also possible that they made their way prior to that 7th century mark also. But there was a different identity attached to the entities. And we're going to look at that other identity. And that other identity is this word, meslamtea. Hopefully that's the way you pronounce it, because it's very difficult to find information about this and how you pronounce that word. But that is the spelling there, and that is the name of an entity and the name of collectives associated with the entity. And so part of the reason why there's some confusion about who came, when they came, how they came, what they were doing, uh, why they were even here. It's very confusing, again, because of all of these name changes, these construct changes going on. And this is one perfect example of that. And so there is a narrative about when the migration came and when the migration took place, but there's another narrative attached to another name and another identity that suggests that this movement took place much earlier, that this migration was going on much earlier, and this migration was going in multiple directions, and this migration even then was associated with a spiritual dynamic. Now, sometimes individuals are concealing the spiritual dynamics because that's, again, part of the game playing and part of the manipulation. But what's going on here, we discussed this again back in 2021, and you can look back and see that discussion. But sometimes these narratives are concealed because there's something else going on under the surface, and this is no exception.